The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings. How's everybody doing? I hope everything's going fine with you. Hope it's not too hot in the area in which you are. We have, I think, an interesting topic for today. I want to greet the viewers. Brother Ugawa, as always. Ubuntu Go Guest, good morning. I haven't seen you before. Glad to see you. Make sure you subscribe to the show. M. Jewel, Loud Zoo. See if there are any others here. Cora Majors, greetings to you. See if there's, yeah, okay. And for others, as you come on. When you're watching this show, if you like it, hit the like button and encourage people as they come on to do the same thing. Wolf Manlu, greetings to you as well. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the show. I just want to again extend my love and say that I really appreciate the love that I've been receiving from the viewers. That's what keeps me going. To a Yenon, glad to see you. Yeah, I hear you. It's definitely too hot. I had to open the door where I do the show. Normally I have it closed. And it's usually not warm down here. It's not that warm, but it's warm enough. So, I really appreciate the love and appreciate the various comments and insights that have come from all of you. I've learned a lot. The key purpose of this show is to empower our people. Not that you aren't empowered because you empower yourself, but this is to encourage your own self-empowerment through a deep sense of self-knowledge. And that means a knowledge of just about everything, but it starts with knowing yourself And you're seeing in these last two shows, and this will be a continuation of it, it's a knowledge in this particular case of your spirit self, which is a key component of your identity. In this case, your identity as Africans. So, and thank you for the comment that you look forward to the book on Seba to come out. I've been doing so many other things lately. I haven't been writing. I got to get back to writing, and hopefully I'll finish this book on Seba this year. One of the things that is really good, and Brother Ogawa and I have been talking about it, is the increase in viewership, and we're averaging 1,000 viewers a show in a week. And that's good because a lot of shows that have many more subscribers than we have don't do much better than that. It's usually 1,500 unless they have someone on that really draws. And there are a few shows like that. So it also means that out of our subscribers, which is also growing at a good pace, we're getting more than 20% of our subscribers who are consistent viewers. And that's really important because it means that the show means something to people. And it means something to me that people are taking an interest in it and then offering their ideas. I thought I had the Cash App thing solved, but it appears that I haven't. I'll get it solved. I got some notices that it didn't work. And so hopefully by next week, I'll have that solved. I want to remind you that this Monday, I'm going to have the honor of interviewing Amilcar Cabral. That is the brother right behind me in the sunglasses, the greatest leader in the 20th century. He's African from Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, but I didn't say greatest African leader. That just means he's the greatest among African leaders, which probably makes him the greatest. But I said the greatest leader, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So I'll be interviewing his wife this Monday, and it'll be taped and it'll be shown this coming Saturday. Ana Maria Cabral, and she's a brilliant woman. So that will be the show coming up this coming Saturday. And, I prepared for this show. It's prepared, and so we're ready to go. This is a big honor. This is a lady who took part in the armed struggle and who played a very significant leadership role in both the PAIGC, Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, but also in the government that followed. So watch the show that's coming up next Saturday. For the last 2 weeks, this show has focused on basically Yoruba philosophy. I had planned earlier, prior to last week's show, to include Akan and Kemetic philosophy last week, but then I realized that that was not appropriate for that time. So today's show is going to focus on Kemetic, Akan, and African philosophy in general. And the topic, as you've seen, is why is Kemetic or African philosophy so radically different from Aryan or Greek philosophy? So I'm coming at this from a different angle, and this really brings in virtually all African philosophies because African cultures, and in this case, African deep thought, have a common cultural unity. And when you're dealing with philosophy for African people, you're dealing with our spirit systems, which Europeans and Africans tend to call spiritual systems, but there is no word in any African language for spirit, for spiritual. There is in all African languages a word for spirit, for prayer, for praise, for sacrifice, but no word for spiritual. And the reason is that's an intellectual conception. And generally, when you start getting general, you're in the European realm. And so some of us will talk about spiritual, but be afraid to talk about spirit. And most of our historians, even African, don't dwell on spirit. And some even say it wasn't central to our civilization. Some of our best scholars say that. And that's because of their Western despiritualized training that makes them ashamed to associate with the spirit. And some of our scholars come out of the Black church and sanctified, holiness, rolling all over the aisle. And they want to back off of association with spirit because of they think there's something wrong with it because it's got a Christian connotation. But what they miss is that the Africans who created the Black church, they put voodoo in it, and it was after slavery, and they weren't forced to do it. It was on their own charge. And that's where a lot of the beauty in Black culture comes from. I was watching something that CNN had on, a celebration for Juneteenth. It was terrible. They had all these singers on who could sing white. They were Black, but they could sing white, but they couldn't sing right. You know what I mean? It didn't have that funk in it. It didn't have that blues in it because some of the younger generation, for various reasons, opt out of the church. And I understand that. But some of them don't know what they opt out of because some of them, as a result, have lost the ability to go inside their souls. And when you see people in this age group jumping up and shouting and clapping over something that is sad, it ain't got no soul. In fact, a white person could come in and beat you because they're probably going to copy your soul stuff. You know what I mean? So if any of them are watching, I'm not knocking you. I understand the influence that created this, you know? And one reason why your ancestors could come through the hell of enslavement is they drew from the souls of Africa and brought it into the Americas and into the United States. And they created something magnificent and beautiful. And its beauty stems from its Africanness transformed into this reality. You know what I mean? And in the musical plane, that's the spiritual blues. That's the blues. That's jazz. That's gospel blues. That's rhythm and blues. That's soul. That's funk. That's hip hop, real hip hop, not this corporate stuff. So when we deal with this, why is Kemetic or African philosophy so radically different from Aryan or Greek philosophy? And when I say Aryan, I'm talking about all Europeans. We are really getting down to the essence of what defines a people. So what I want to do is start this off with a framework, and then this framework will frame the discussion. And this framework goes like this. Because for the last couple of weeks, I've been dealing with the African conception, looking at the Yoruba, but you're going to see it's the African, and you're going to see it's the universal conception of what it means to be human by looking at the Yoruba conception of destiny. And today I'll be looking at the Akan, or the people of Ghana, one group in Ghana, but it's pretty representative of a lot of other groups, and Kemetic. But in general, I'm looking at the overall African framework around the meaning of being human. And so the discussion on destiny, in this case, Ori, from the Yoruba perspective, And then today we'll get into the Akan and Kemetic conception. The reason for focusing on that is it's the essence of your being. And some people may think that's a theory. Well, if it's a theory based on truth and fact, yes. If it's a theory based on something that comes off the top of your head, no. Because one, you'd have to explain how all these African cultures all came up with pretty much the same thing. But today you're going to see each one gives you another angle. Like I'm going to do an angle today that takes another glance at this, puts it in another perspective. So, in framing the topic for this discussion of why Kemetic or African philosophy is so radically different from Aryan or Greek philosophy, first of all, some of you will be confused because some think that the Greeks just took everything from Kemet. That was the thesis of George James' Stolen Legacy. And that book really kicked off the African-centered cultural renaissance in this country. It's a great book. And he was right that there are things that the Greeks and the West stole from, Africa, in this case, Kemet. And in fact, we can go further and say if you want to deal with Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the foundation comes out of the mystery systems of Kemet, Yeah. But they're not the same, because if they were, you wouldn't be drug over here on the good ship Jesus. You hear what I'm telling you? So something else happened when Moses went in there as a priest under the Pharaoh Akhenaten and came up, drew the 10 Commandments from the 42 Confessions of Innocence, and something else happened. I'm not going into that today. I'm simply saying that, yeah, you've got a case when you say that a good part of Western religion has drawn from an African base, yet, in this case, Kemetic, yet it's different. First of all, it's a religion. The African systems were spirit systems. And there's a lot of other differences. I've explained this in other discussions. So in the case of the Greeks, when George James said that Greek philosophy was stolen Egyptian philosophy, that was partially true. There are a number of things that they took from Kemet. But at the core, the Greeks were drawing from an Aryan worldview. They had Kemet on the icing. For example, the book I'm doing on Seba, which is dealing with the teaching method, which Seba means star, literally the light that dwells within each human being. So Seba is the art of bringing the light out. So the Greeks also, when they defined pedagogy, they defined it as the light. They got this from the Kemites because they are not a light people. They're not into spirit, light, all that kind of stuff. But they then culturalized it and put it in the Greek context. So what was that Greek context? Bringing the light of the male student out. They excluded the female. And it's interesting that Western so-called civilization would claim Greece as its foundation, deny, since the period of colonialism, the African origin, the African basis of Kemetic and African civilization in general, and think that they're doing something great, when in fact they did reproduce Greece in this country. Who could vote? Rich white males for a long time. White women couldn't. Blacks couldn't because we weren't even considered human. And we'll get to the Supreme Court decision at the end of this. Native Americans, not only not considered human, they were tracking them down to kill every last one of them. You know what I mean? So you can look at the Kemetic concept of education, but when you transposed it into the Greek context, it got changed. But it got changed in a lot of other ways as well. This is the key point. So what I want to do today is to start this off with a contrast. It's a question, and then I'll provide the answers, and then you can raise questions or make your own comments, because I know some of you have done your homework on this. So the question is, why did the Kemites, the so-called Egyptians, Kemites meaning land of the blacks, referring to the black-skinned people, KMT was in Medu Neter, the writing of ancient Kemet was a charcoal person, a black person. That's what it meant. So why is it that the Kemites viewed origin, human origin, cosmic origin? And you could say of this cosmos, but I'm sure they understood that there were multiple cosmos, as the Dogon did. So why did they frame origin in the context of a concept called Septepy? Septepy. 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 Sepi means first occasion. First occasion. And I'm going to get into what that meant in a minute. And why is it that instead of framing human and cosmic origin in the framework of Septepy, which you're going to see what it meant in a minute, why is it that the Greeks framed it in the framework of evolution? So this is an angle. See, one of the things, I'm a historian, political thinker, and philosopher, and there's a lot of different dimensions in that, but my first love is the truth. My first love in life is strategy. And when it comes to disciplines, what's called philosophy, or what the Dogon called deep knowledge, or Jacob Carruthers, my master, who's passed on, called deep thought, which I think he got that. That was his way of reframing how the Dogon defined it. So that's my first love, my first love. And it's a spirit system, you know what I mean? So I ain't got no problem with that. Now, I want to be honest. I was not always as spirit oriented as I am now. There was an evolution in that. I'm using the term evolution. There was a growth in that. Some people, my best friend has said, well, brother, meaning I was kind of theoretical then, but I was also in the spirit, but not as deeply as I am now. So I want to honestly own up to that. And my family was never into church, even though I got baptized. My people were spiritual people. My father had intuition that saved his life a few times, and my mother communed with God when she had her 10 hours of sleep, because she worked all day running her preschool, and before that, running us. She was a what they call a person who administered heavy manners, but was a loving woman and grew greatly. Great teacher, ran a preschool. And students called her Teacher Love. In fact, I'm dedicating the book Septepy to her, to my mother. Straight A student. I wasn't. She was. So what did the Kemites mean by Septepy? And then towards the end, I'll get into what the Greeks and the Aryans meant by evolution, but cast it in a broader light, because I'm using Septepy and I'm using evolution as a framework for looking at how philosophies are framed, how cultures see themselves in the world, and specifically why. And I want to acknowledge an Akan philosopher. His name is Kwame Gyeke. Kwame Gyeke. He's alive today in Ghana, and he's a Harvard graduate, but Harvard didn't mess him up. Kwame Gyeke is a noted philosopher on Akan philosophy, ethics, and thought. And so I want to acknowledge him. and acknowledge his contribution. I want to acknowledge the deep thinkers in continental Africa, as well as the deep thinkers we have in this country. I stand on the shoulders of them, you know. So in the case of what did Septepi mean, first of all, to the Kemites? It meant first occasion. And that meant when happening happened. That would be the Kemite way of putting it. When happening happened. And then there'd be a time before happening happened, you know. So for the Kemites, when happening happened was the beginning of creation. And for them, and this is symbolic, I don't think they really took this as the actual state of how happening happened in its beginning, but it's a metaphor for them. And so it is the noon, N-U-N, a watery-like substance. For them, the first occasion is a watery-like substance. Now, we know the earth is fundamentally water, 75% or so, and the human being is as well. And so there's profound stuff to that. And Africans generally believe that water is the first element. We have no problem with that. And then out of this watery substance emerges God, in this case, Ptah, the creator God. So Septepi means first occasion when, the beginning of everything happened, when happening happened. And they associate it with that. And then God comes out of that. So you'll say, well, yeah, that don't make sense because God is the source of everything. And I would agree. But I think that what they're doing is they're giving you a metaphor for this. Because what Ptah is coming out of is a watery electromagnetic mass, a mass of energy. And we're going to see that that is perfectly consistent with what God is. That is the source of that. You know what I mean? So for the ancient Kemites, Septepi means the first occasion of the noon, right? Literally. And so anytime they would do anything, they would replicate the noon in it. If they built a pyramid, they would have water around it. And by the way, it's very interesting that the Mayans, who inherit their civilization from the Olmecs, did the same thing, which is telling you that the Olmecs, the mother of Mesoamerican civilizations, Mayan, Aztec, Toltec, Inca, that the Olmecs carried that same belief with them. So that's the literal meaning of first occasion for the Kemites. And as Jacob Carruthers would often teach, anytime Africans wanted to correct something, that is, when their system had gone foul or oppressive, as it did in Kemet and in other places in Africa, the way to restore justice was to go back to Septepi for the Kemites, or for inter-Africans, Africans in general, the first occasion of history, to go back to that. So why Septepi then for the Kemites and for the Africans? For generally for the Africans, the Septepi would be the Twa. And in fact, for the Kemites, it was the Twa. And in fact, historically, in terms of their philosophy, their metaphors, it's noon. But in terms of history, the founders of Kemet were Anu. Those were agrarian Twa. The founders of civilization for Africa and then later the world were the Twa. Kum or San people. According to mitochondrial DNA, they trace back 149,000 years ago. And so if Africans want to correct anything then, and I would say now, you need to go back to the first principles established by the first people. So why did we always go back to first occasion? In Kemet, the Noon, in Africa, the roots of African civilization. And I'm saying old Africans, the ancient ones, going back 10,000 BC and a little earlier, who move out of the hunter-gatherer stage, they would know where their agriculture came from. It came from these Kung people, you know, who are Twa, these little people who are God's people. So what's important here is in the African conception of human origin, whether it is the Sep Tepi of Kemet or the Twa among African people, or if you want, when it comes to history, the Kemites would go back to Asar, you know, as the source, as the beginning, as the ancestor through which they trace their wisdom, their civilization. The founders of Pharaonic civilization, the first pharaoh, who happened to be Anu, a little guy. So we get history here, and we get philosophy or religion. So if their priests are going to cite anything, they're going to go back to the origin of the Pharaonic system. Though, if we're correct, we would go back to the origin of that, which are the Anu, who in the beginning come in probably as hunter-gatherers, transition into agriculturalists, and for a long time have no Pharaonic system. They're ruling each other. According to the principles that I've discussed, that the mother principle, return to the African mother principle of male and female equality, has been the first to uncover the just society, which is one where, and these words come from God, all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. When you have males and females equally empowered, you have balance. That's Ma'at in its best expression. And you're not going to have oppression, because there are going to be enough of the males and females to check anybody that wants to do that. And because you got the power to do it. And if you want to see misery in the world today, you all know that the fourth leading cause of death in the United States is poverty. The fourth leading cause of death. People are starving to death. You hear me? Starving to death. And you got babies, children, Black especially, and Native American. It's worse among them and then us, and a lot of brown and whites who are gone to bed hungry, wake up hungry. You understand? Laying in streets, homeless. You know, the richest country on earth. But this rich country has got most of the wealth in the hands of 1%. So what Africans did was go back to the first time and first principles. And so also when they go back to human origins, their understanding of the origin of the cosmos is perfectly consistent with their concept of God. Western concepts of science exclude God for good reason. Their conception of God is inconsistent with science. But the African conception of God not only is consistent with science, but explains the source of science. So when we're going back to first occasion, Africans are always dealing with a spirit basis for that. And in this case, their conception of God, which is a spirit conception, which is consistent with quantum physics and astrophysics. So in the Akan conception, God is called Onyame, Onyame, Onyame. And what does that mean? Infinite. God is infinite. And the Khan have an interesting concept. They say God dwelled in infinite time. Well, that's really interesting, because in the West, the concept of time is not infinite. And so this idea of dwelling in infinite time. And then God is the source of space, but not God. God is not spatial. God is providing, space. God creates space, but God is not in space per se. You understand? Aspect of God, a piece of God, but God is beyond space. But God creates space, and then God is the source of being. God is the source of the cosmos. So what we have here is God is infinite. That is consistent with the Trois conception of God is infinite force, a part of which God distributes to everything that God creates. And so if you have science, you'd better have spirit in it. And if spirit isn't in your science, it's not good science. And while in Western science, astrophysics and quantum physics include energy, they don't understand what it is. It's a God force. So when we're looking at origin, therefore, God is always included in this origin, but it's a scientific thing. It's not a mumbo jumbo thing. So the African conception of destiny that I spent some time on, especially focusing on the Yoruba, and today I'll get into the Akan and the Kemetic conceptions of destiny. They are both spirit-based. Why is that important? Well, first of all, we should know that we're all spirits in a body. So the question is, what are these spirits? I'm only dealing with one dimension of the spirit, which is destiny. And this is extremely important because it explains your human origins, this concept of destiny. The one that I've dealt with for 2 weeks, coming from the Yoruba, they describe destiny as Ori. And they say it's what you pick in heaven in the presence of God, but it's your own choice. And they have a bunch of other terms that I went through that all mean choice, which means as human beings, we're powerful beings that made a decision to be here. That's the Yoruba conception of human origin, Ori. And I call this spirit science, basically, because you got a conception of origin. I'm going to try and show you is accurate. It's not somebody's idea that they just dreamed up. And so it means that the essence of your spirit is powerful. All of it is. But this particular essence, which is destiny, which is your purpose in life. So the Kemites had a conception of destiny, which they called Ka. And what's interesting about African conceptions of destiny is that they're all consistent, but each one provides a window to seeing something else. And in fact, you get a better idea of the overall meaning of destiny by looking at current African conceptions that are alive today than looking at Kemet. And see, a lot of people, if you deal with anything other than Kemet, they got a problem. They missed the point. When Sheikh Anta Diop said, for Kemet is to Africa as Greece is to Europe, he didn't mean focus exclusively or solely on Kemet. He meant it's a central civilization of the stratified societies, because the foundational civilization is Trois and it's global, and then it springs out of that. So this is the organized societies where you have cities and you have a stratification in terms of people being organized into different categories: priests, farmers, warriors, so forth, rulers, so forth. So when we're looking at the African conception of destiny, then the inner African conception coming from the Akan, coming from the Yoruba, from the Igbo and others, they'll tell you more than you're going to read in the literature on Kemet, because they'll basically refer to Ka and then some other things and tell you that that's your destiny. But the Kemites also add, and that doesn't mean they didn't have this understanding. It means that this kind of knowledge either hasn't been dug out or it was esoteric. But what's important is the Kemites bring out dimensions of destiny that are implied in the Yoruba and the Asante, because they will say, for example, the Yoruba will say Ori is twin. So they'll say twin. And then they have a bunch of meanings. But when the Kemites describe destiny as Ka, they say, and this is another dimension, they say that the Ka means the double. Now, I've discussed this in a previous show. You go back to some of my earlier shows, but I'm dealing with this in another context. So they would say, first of all, it resides in your heart, whereas the Yoruba say it's in your head. You know, your Ori is in your head. They would say it's in your heart. They also say it is your spirit double. And so in Kemet, it's two upraised hands like this that mean double. Ka. What does that mean? They meant that every human being has a spirit double. That's your Ka that looks just like you. The only difference is that Ka is free of any infirmities, meaning it's not unhealthy. And of course, it's a spirit. So that is extremely important. Now, I'm going to go into in a minute into the spirit systems of today. That is, people who have spirit gifts and are able to see things. It's called parapsychology, and show you that they've seen this same stuff. You know what I mean? And there are some people who are gifted and can see a person's double. Very few, but there are some who are able to see this. So this double is also described as your life force. You're alive as long as your Ka is with you. Your Ka departs along with other parts of you that are your spirit components. You're finished, because basically the body is only alive when it is enlivened by the spirit, and the Ka is extremely important as your purpose, why you're here. So the Ka is your identical twin spirit double, and your Ka is your protector. Your Ka lies in your heart. So when you're weighed at judgment, it's the Ka that's being weighed. That is everything you've done in your life. And generally, you'll see in Medu Neter script where the person who is passing on to judgment will ask his Ka to defend him. Well, yes, if what you did was based on Ma'at. But the Ka is going to tell the truth. Now, parapsychology confirms this. I'm going to get into this in a minute. So the Ka is the double. And the Ka is also what looks out for you. The Ka is the source of energy that is central to your life. So that is what the Kemites say, that the Ka is a double. And this is an important addition. And if you look at meta-nature drawings, you will see meta-nature drawings of a person, and behind that person is an identical person. I have a carving in the back of me where you see a tsar holding two scepters. You don't see it, but at the other end of that is a double. It's a portrayal of a pharaoh and his spirit who is standing behind him, which is his ka. So we all have a spirit double. And as the Yoruba said, it is the one that looks out for you. It is the one that warned you of danger. And it is yours alone. And as we'll see, and as the Yoruba say, and the Akan as well, this is what you pick in heaven. So for the Akan, destiny is called Nkrabea, Nkrabea, Nkrabea. That also means destiny. And the Akan are in agreement with the Kemites that this destiny is picked in heaven in the presence of God. Now, there's some there are some African philosophers who will say that sometimes God affixes your destiny. God picks your destiny. That isn't true. But that's the Western influence. So there are some who think that that's the way it goes, but that isn't the way it goes. This is a choice that you make in heaven in the presence of God. And we'll see there are refinements to this in parapsychology that explains even other dimensions that also make sense. So again, Akan, Yoruba, they're in agreement. And so human origin, when we're going back to Septepi, in this case, the first occasion for Africans, when we're looking at where do humans come from, we'll note that most Africans will have a heavenly name. For example, Zulu means heavenly people. You came from heaven. Or the Dogon say that they come from the star Sirius B, from men, or Imenya, the companion star to Sirius B. So that's heavenly origin, but that's the origin of human beings, So again, this is a Septepi, but this Septepi is around the most fundamental thing of who you are. You are a person whose home is heaven, who made the decision to make the descent to earth for certain reasons and for certain purposes. And this is why you're here. Now, parapsychology. Parapsychology is a field where people who have experienced death and come back in milliseconds, they have lost the heartbeat, could no longer breathe. And they have recorded their experiences. And then we find this same set of records not only among people in the West, we find it in the East. The Indians, especially in India, have a lot of these kinds of records, cases where a person who's conscious, because some of them remember their time in heaven. I've seen some shows where a little kid comes into a shop in India and tells an old man he owes him money. And he says, "What do you mean?" And he describes who he was in a past lifetime, that he loaned this guy money. He wants his money back. So there is that. Some people have the memory, but most of us do not remember this past life in heaven. And I've explained before, my priest, Ifeyemi, says, because if we've got some great destiny in store for us, or at least that's what we picked, we might get lazy and not do it. Or because in heaven you do other things, you pick other things that face you in life, then that just might turn you off. You just might think it's too hard. So, what does parapsychology say about this? Um, I've shown this before. This Oprah Winfrey had this woman on, Embraced by the Light, Betty J. Eady. This is a woman who's part Native American. She appeared on Oprah's show years ago, and she had had the experience of dying a few seconds or whatever. Remember, heaven's outside of space and time. So what you experience there can occur. A lot of things can happen in a very short period of time. You're outside of that. You're in the realm of experience, not in the realm of time. And so she's a Christian. What did she see? She saw spirits in heaven in the presence of God making compacts on their destiny. And then there are thousands of other cases of this. This is something I study. You know, I'm an astrologer. I'm into other spirit realms. You know what I mean? And what do they all say? The same thing. And then I've seen ones that say some things that are pretty miserable. You know, I remember watching one show where a guy had this experience, and you could look at him and see he was no good. Said his eyes and his expression, you know. And he went to the other side. And what did he see? All his friends. They were in that molten pit that's hot, suffering. What the Christians and the Muslims and others call hell. Now, what the Yorubas say is what these other religions call hell is ruled by God. There's no devil. God rules that. And you're in there until you learn your lessons. You're not in there forever, you know? And so this guy, he saw all his friends low down like him. Oh, he came back and wanted to change. Oh, he was asking God to give him plenty of time because he'd need a lot of time to correct the mess that he had done on earth. You know what I mean? So what parapsychology says is that people at the level of the spirits in heaven make decisions on what they want to do. And some decide that they want to come to earth. And they decide that they want to address certain issues on earth. So there was a question from one of our viewers before about, is destiny just individual? Lao Tzu asked this, and another viewer of the show asked this. And while the readings are individual, each person picks their own destiny. It's groups of spirits in heaven, according to parapsychology, and this is confirmed also in Yoruba systems. My Babalawo said this is true. So there are groups of spirits in heaven that decide that they want to come down to earth to contribute in certain changes and transformations. And they pick a destiny. That is, they pick a purpose or purposes on earth. They pick their parents. They pick their strengths and weaknesses. They pick the trials that they're going to go through. Now, don't use this to say, oh, so they pick slavery. No. And in fact, God didn't send anybody from heaven to enslave anybody. Those were choices that people made on earth. And so then there are some brave spirits in heaven that say, we want to change this. And so we're going to come down to do whatever we can to change it. But the point is that the pattern of life, according to parapsychology, is that the people, the spirits in heaven choose this. And then this eating woman is talking about seeing spirits in heaven who are trying to coax their future father and mother into a relationship. Now, this future father and mother, they were friends in heaven. They had made a compact in heaven to do this, but they forgot, because when you get to earth, you don't remember this. And so they're doing things from the spirit realm to coax them into a relationship so they can give birth to the spirit. You know what I mean? And so that's the point. And generally, what the parapsychology says is, as the Yorubas say, the Asantes say, and I'm sure the Kemites and other Africans know, that when you pick your destiny, you have one of the things you get, because this is telling you have free will. And so generally there's an agreement that God's staying out of the picture. You're going to make your choices. But when you need God, you can call on God. Because while God's an infinite force outside of space and outside of time, God is no thing and is everywhere. Can't be seen, but is inside of all of us as a spark within us. But when you're calling on God, and you know the best way is through prayer or meditation, if what you say is in accord with what you're doing, you can get help. But you're not going to get help on the essentials. It's like when you take a final exam. Of course, the professor, I'm going to use this. You can't cheat. If you get caught, you flunk. And in life, we come here because also there are lessons we haven't learned in past lives. And so we're coming here to learn those lessons. Heaven is a preparatory ground for that. There are many levels of heaven. And so those of us who are coming back, we weren't at the highest level. That's where God is. You know what I mean? And all of us don't choose to come back. So it's your choice. This is the key thing to get about all of this. God's not some dictatorial head of some male killer cult. God ain't male. God ain't female. God's spirit, ultimate force of love. I've seen the light. Some of you have, you know. It's nothing but beauty, nothing but unconditional love, nothing but kindness, gentleness, and it's non-judgmental. All this stuff about God is going to judge me. When you pass on and your car does that, that ain't God, that's you. You're passing judgment on yourself. By the way, Sister Henderson, I've been answering one of your questions about what about collective destinies. I'm answering that now. So when you get back, rewatch this, and I acknowledge you as the source of this question, along with Lao Tzu, because you would ask also the question of, is there such a thing as collective destiny? And remember, if you have a personal destiny, what would the collective be? It would be a combination of those. But what I've just explained is that according to parapsychology, spirits in heaven make decisions to come down to address similar issues. Now, each destiny is different. So each person's purpose is different. So, So we have issues in past lives we didn't learn in our past lives. We didn't pass the test. And so part of the reason for coming back down here is to work through those. That's why I had to work through the feminine issues. I hadn't passed the test in past lives. It was obvious, you know? So when we tie this conception of destiny as based on choice, and we tie it to the power of the mind and the power of the spirit, which is thought. And we've gone through before how you are your thoughts, and your thoughts help shape your reality. This is not denying that your enemy has thoughts, your enemy has reality, and your enemy is trying to shape yours. In the Akan conception of God, they say God is ultimate reality. And when we come to human beings, we shape our reality, but we can also be turned in negative courses by those who are out to oppress us. So, the old saying, praise the Lord and pass the ammunition, prayer, being spiritual, is important. I'm a warrior, so I obviously don't just believe that prayer is what happens. And I have to be honest, rarely when I'm in battle am I praying. I got to be honest about that one. I got a strategy. Prayer is in my strategy, but I have gone to, as I pointed out, Ifa, my Yoruba priest, when we were at wit's end fighting to preserve Black studies in 2 years of battle, I went to my priest and told him to do something, right? And whatever he did, it also helped end the battle and was victorious. But he didn't win the battle, we did. And I was winning battles before I knew anything about Ifa. So I'm not suggesting that if you don't know your powers and your destiny, because I didn't when I was in these battles in the 60s, I didn't know that, though I did through astrology, because basically your astrological chart is your destiny map that you chose in heaven. Still, I didn't know about the Ka, the Ba, all of this. You know, I didn't know the real power of the mind. I didn't know all of that stuff. I was still winning. But to know this, it puts you in a more powerful position. But if you think that this is all that's going to take care of it, you better roll up your sleeves and fight. Because as long as you're oppressed, you better fight and bring in all your powers. Now, what's the relevance of this also for our history? The reason that the African in enslavement could carry themselves through this, whether in the US, the Caribbean, South America, or the African in colonialism, or the African now under semi-colonialism in the US, meaning we got elements of colonialism, or neo-colonialism, where they're being oppressed through economic manipulation and control of their countries. Again, to bring about this transformation, it's going to take the power of the people, but it's going to take spirit power, political power, social power, economic power, gun power, any kind of power you can draw together. And if you just spookify it and just put it on one level, you're escaping. And the whole point about African culture is to make the past apply to the present. Take the best out of your past and use it, and then do the transformation that you need to do now to bring about change in your society today and tomorrow, you know? So, Septepi, why Septepi for the African? The African is focused on origin, first because we're the original people, we're the first people. So it's going to be natural for us to go back to the first since we're the source on earth. That's going to be natural. And then when we understand the societies that we have constructed, we understand that some of the best models that we can use to change the oppression that we face today is through drawing from the best of our past and then coming up with our own innovations, our own creations. And this African American in America is creative by nature because we had to be to recreate a culture here. So why Septepi for the African? Why a spiritual origin? Because that's the truth. And I would say parapsychology confirms that. And if you don't think so, the ultimate proof will be when you pass on. It's going to be too late for us to talk about it, depending on who gets there first. But that's the ultimate proof. But if you think about it, think about what is it that really carries you through? What warns you of what's going to happen? And what happens when you listen to those warnings? You know, that's that Ka, that Ori, that destiny that's inside of you, that force that's inside of you, that's looking out for you. Are you listening to it? Now, let's get to this other part of the question. So why is it that the Aryan Greek philosophy based its conception on human evolution? And what is the Greek conception of, and not only human evolution, but earthly evolution, and to the extent that they had it, cosmic evolution? Why is it that the Greeks and the Aryans, by that I mean Europeans, and I'll go back into a definition of Aryans in a minute, why did they rest origins, not on the beginning that has a God force, but on evolution. First, the question is, what did Aristotle and what did the Greeks in general mean by evolution? And Aristotle basically saw evolution as a ladder of life, where organisms gradually change and change into other forms. This was his idea, and it was a mechanical idea, but it's a ladder of life where organisms gradually change to more elaborate forms. So this just automatically happens. Interesting, And then the Greek theory of evolution is where, and this is through their philosophy, they said living things were related. Okay, there's some truth in that, but they were guessing, they were guessing. And then, we have the modern idea of evolution, which is organisms evolve into higher and higher levels, and the lower levels cease to exist. And when you combine that with racism, that could also be used to justify genocide, But basically, these are mechanical ideas of origin, and it's defined as scientific. So, and God's out of the picture. And in fact, a lot of us have been captured by this and are almost ashamed to put anything spirit into science, And I would agree if you're talking about the religions of Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, because their conceptions are not consistent with the Big Bang or with astrophysics in general or quantum physics. There's none of that in there because the people that came up with this didn't know this, And so their God concept is not consistent with that. So it's understandable that scientists today would have trouble dealing with Western religion or others that operate on this level. So the Aryan Greek conception of human and cosmic origin is material. It's despiritualized. It can deal with matter, but can't deal with spirit. And that's a problem since we know that all matter is enlivened by energy, animate or inanimate. It has energy in it. That is the source of it. And by the way, in parapsychology, when they deal with the ka, parapsychology confirms the ka, and they call it the etheric double. And it describe it the same way the Kemites did, as your identical twin. And when this is explained through scientific terms, then basically what's being explained is that the etheric double is a spirit that is not matter because it's a much more subtle free force. And that subtle free force is outside of a body. And so it is not operating at a constant vibratory force or rate of speed. But with human beings, when that energy is at a constant rate, then it can combine into a physical or material form. And so that's the difference. They're both spirits in a body or in a material thing. But the etheric double is pure spirit, just as spirits are. And spirits have all kinds of capacities that human beings don't have, even though we have spirits inside of us. A purely spirit being can be in 5 places at the same time, for example. You know, so the Aryan Greek conception of human and cosmic origin is material rather than spirit and matter, or spiritual and material, because it has an Aryan orientation. Just as the African Septepi orientation comes from a people who are the first, and then we come up with ideas and speculate on how the first occasion developed and everything else. And so it can be the noon, or it can be your first wise person, or it can be the Dogon conception, which is the Sirius B, which explodes and gives birth to the cosmos, which we know is consistent with astrophysics, the smallest of small things giving rise to everything else, and understanding that it's energy, you know. And they're master astrophysics, but physicists, but they are also master spiritists. So the Greek conception of this idea that evolution, or a mechanical thing, is the source of the origin of human life and of the cosmos, comes out of a people who come out of those conditions. And these are Aryan conditions. And so I've explained this before. Aryan is like the root of what you call Europeans or whites, Aryans. And you have Arius, which is Lord and Master, Aryans, who are the masses. Arius are the warriors. Aryans are the masses of people who are regarded by the warriors as no good for nothing, dirty scum. And that's basically what Aryan and Arius means. Aryans were nomadic warriors, and they come out of pastoral societies in Russia, Ukraine, and the Caucasus Mountains. That's their source. And they go back 4,000 BC or so. And that's their origin. And theirs is a system of warfare and plunder. Their social system is patriarchal. And so for them, material is reality. And for them, power is the means for prosperity. And it was through domesticating the horse, coming out of a pastoral system, that they were able to move. And then creating weapons of war, spears, and other weapons, they were able to conquer. And so when you're going back to origin, and why is it that the Aryan would see evolution as the cause of things, and would have a mechanical idea of the origin of the cosmos and of human beings, it's also tied to the conquest mentality of the European, which has been a material one. They're going after conquering people to get stuff, to get control of their lives and everything else. And so power becomes like the key drive for this. You'll see where I'm going when I get down to this Supreme Court thing. Huh? So power is a key thing. Now, I pointed this out before. I'm a philosopher. I study Europeans. I study Asians. The Chinese are a specialty of mine. I study Mexicans. I organized them in the 60s. I studied the European American philosophically, historically, politically. You know what I mean? And so the thing is, the Aryan whether it's the Euro-American or the European, Eastern or Western. The Aryan is, and I've used this term before, is teleological. 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 He's teleological. Now, what does this mean? It means that their philosophy and science is the study of the design or purpose in any natural process. They want to know how a thing operates. It's like a mechanic. They want to be able to break it down. And they believe that any natural process, including evolution, is mechanical. It's got a mechanism to it. So therefore, the central thing about the Aryan, the European, that includes the Greeks, is usefulness. For them, anything you're dealing with, it has to be approached from how do you use it? And basically, how do you control it and direct it through having power over it? So in quantum physics, for example, Descartes, who was a mathematical physicist and is the person who constructed pedagogy for the French, and who said, I think, therefore I am, which is true. That came from a dream, but he misinterpreted it to mean that only the mind mattered. He took the body out of the equation, you know. But his key thing was control. And so he's a mathematical physicist, but he sees invisible energy operating the same way as matter does. He said, I don't care about the origin of energy. I only care about controlling it. And then he said, so we can rule the lower regions of the world. Get it? Huh? So even when they deal with the invisible, they treat it like it's the material. And then because people like Francis Bacon, see, the book I'm finishing analyzes all of these Western thinkers, because you see, most of us don't study Western thought. We just study white supremacy. Huh? Well, guess what? They had a culture long before they got to get their hands on people of color. Guess what? And you better study that. Francis Bacon is the architect of empirical science, and he was not a scientist. And basically, he was taking this same view of nature, viewing it as purely material, having no life within it, and external to human beings, and therefore use science as a means of control. And this philosophy of science, which is to study nature, this is the empirical method, to observe nature, which there's nothing wrong with. You should be observing things. Though that isn't the only way you should treat nature. Because nature is spirit-based, you should be learning from nature. You should be, like George Washington Carver did, communicating with nature. But of course, that's spookism for Western science, except for the masters like Einstein. They know that this all comes from the spirit. So this approach to science, again, treating the earth as a physical being that you observe, as Francis Bacon said, for God hides things, and so we must know nature to control nature and to create a new nature. And you're seeing that in Western science today, you know, where, you know, you've got genetically modified organisms. Once you stick them in the ground, you can't plant a normal seed. And that's for the purpose of what? Making money. And if people don't buy your seed, they starve to death. And since most people can't afford to buy seeds, that's a perfect basis for starvation and profit. So Teleological, that means everything's approached from the standpoint of power and domination and control over it, and for usefulness, that is, to use it to benefit the very few at the expense of everybody else. So it's interesting, therefore, when you're looking at, so why is it that the Aryan is going to be looking at evolution rather from a material standpoint and seeing the origin of things as mechanical? Well, that's because of the way in which their history is developed and their body of knowledge at that time. And you might find exceptions like the Indo-Aryan who adopted a spirit system coming from the Africans, the Dalits, who are now called untouchables. But they use it the same way for control and domination. And if you don't think so, you need to go back and look at their holy books and then look at how spirit stuff that is very strong is subordinate to domination and control through war, you know? And that is, again, the Aryan thing. In this case, for Westerners, war on nature. So it's actually the African spirit science, and for the modern world, embodied by the master George Washington Carver, that offers the salvation for the planet. And of course, African spirit science in general, because you have a lot of Africans who are, whether they're botanists or whatever kind of scientists they are, they're into spirit science. So that's key. So this is the key point, that the reason, particularly that the Aryan has a mechanical idea of evolution, is they have a mechanical idea of their own origin. And it was basically for the purpose of domination and control of other people, including their own, because they've created misery for their own people as well, but the greatest misery for those outside their group. Now, I pointed this out before, but most of you haven't heard it, some have. One of the things that's very interesting to study is etymology, which is the origin of the meaning of words. And what's interesting is in all European or Aryan languages, the word good has one meaning, the same meaning. That means strong. The word bad has one meaning, weak. This ties into the fact, and this is another reason why the Greeks could not just take Kemetic thought and live it, because at the foundation is ma'at, harmony, truth, justice, right order. But in the Greek language, there's no word for right, R-I-G-H-T, or ought, O-U-G-H-T. Neither one. So if you look at Plato's Republic, it's organized on hierarchy, not the highest person being the most truthful, but the highest person, in this case, being the one with reason, the philosopher, but everyone is below them. The point is that hierarchy rules, not truth. So this is the nature of all Aryan systems. I respect Marxism, but I'm not a Marxist. Why? Their philosophy draws from this same worldview. I like the fact that they want to equitably distribute the wealth. Don't like the fact that they don't have a formula for equitably distributing power, other than they say for the working class. They call it a dictatorship of the proletariat, but they don't have one for empowering the people. And it's no accident that a few of them have ended up running stuff. And of course, they haven't really been into communism per se, which is supposed to be the disappearance of the state and no classes, and the end of oppression. Those are notable goals. And had they studied communalism in Africa or among Native Americans, they might actually find out how this worked. Or if had they looked at hunter-gatherer societies, they might have found how this worked. Yeah, like Wolf Manley said, hit the like button. 60 are now watching. Oh, that's nice. That's better than before. So, how does this apply to the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action? I decided to build this in rather than have it separate as a news item. And by the way, with the Greeks, it's very important to note that while Plato and Socrates, and especially Pythagoras was a pure practitioner of Kemetic thought. He was a pure practitioner of it. The masses of Greeks followed this Aryan view, and it was the view of power. And how do you prove that? Every city-state fought every other one. And that's why they could never build a unified nation as the Kemites did, as many other Africans did. They could not, Alexander the Great and his father, they imposed some stuff on him, but they were not Greeks, So this is the drive for power, and this is the thing we see affect the Western world. That this country's been at war for almost its entire existence. It's just a few years where it has not been at war. It is the nature of how the Aryan works, and this is why there's so much misery in this country, You've got a few people with all the wealth, and then the budget of the government is put into war, into fighting, So the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action is consistent with this Aryan worldview. Worldview that the powerful do what they want and everybody else just has to suffer it. The Supreme Court is among the most conservative forces in the society. The corporations direct everything, and they do what they want. They get the welfare while they're doing their best to grab your little Social Security check. And they were able to get a guy named Bill Clinton to end the welfare for the poor, while every time they got a problem, the government's bailing them out, and their wealth is based on the government. So this decision is based on the assumption that there's a meritocracy in America, meaning that people prosper in this country based on merit. That everybody who's doing well, they're real smart. They passed the test. They had to do everything right. Well, that means you don't know anything about the history of this country. This country, yeah, it's based on affirmative genocide, wiping out the Native Americans. Affirmative enslavement, wiping out, enslaving the African and exterminating, The wealth of this country was delivered by the federal government to corporations. If you looked at the Civil War, Lincoln was giving away the land of Native Americans to the railroad barons, and all the rights underneath. And that's been the case all along, What's called legacy that's being preserved, where they say donors or former attendees at universities get a reserved space for their children. What that is really concealing is the fact these people are the rulers, number one, the managers, number two, children. And so, of course, they're going to get in like George Bush, boy could barely read, or Trump. His grades were so bad, he's had them sealed. He don't want anybody to see him, So this country is not based on meritocracy. It's based on power. It's based on those who control the power doing what they want. This attack on affirmative action has generally been put in a very individualistic focus. What needs to be understood is, and in my previous, one of my early shows when Trump was running for office, I did a show on the second post Reconstruction and laid out how Trump would be defeated, and it happened pretty much that way. And I was showing that basically Trump is a part of a process that's occurred since 1968 called post Reconstruction, that came into being in 1876 when Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president in a closely run presidential election and was thrown into the House of Representatives. He was given the office of president as long as he agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, the few left to protect us. There were never very, very many. And he agreed to put a couple of Southerners on the Supreme Court. Most people don't know this one. So that they can roll back whatever gains had been gained in the Civil Rights Bill, voting rights, and others. And so that's what was done. Trump has basically done that by putting 3 conservatives on the Supreme Court, delivering 6 conservatives to only 3 on the other side. And so, but the key point is, this is the second post-Reconstruction. It started in 68. The point of the second post-Reconstruction is to roll back the gains of the second Reconstruction, which began in 55 with the Montgomery bus boycott and continued on and ended legal apartheid and gave blacks the rights to vote. But we have seen since then, the Voting Rights Act has been eviscerated through stripping the provisions of the Voting Rights Bill, and we're seeing all kinds of measures to take, the right to vote away from blacks and to take it away from young people who will vote Democratic, and a host of other moves. It started with the Bakke decision, which was a white person, a Jewish American who was older, claimed that he couldn't get into medical school because of affirmative action. The Supreme Court ruled in his favor, saying that this was reverse discrimination, as though blacks could lynch whites or blacks could oppress whites, as though we had the power or the will. So this has to be viewed within that context. This is a move to roll back the gains that we made in the second Reconstruction. The problem that they have with this is this. The biggest gain was the freedom of the black mind. The biggest gain was blacks exercising black power. And that's what produced the change. And in fact, affirmative action, one of the beginnings of affirmative action occurred through the San Francisco Freedom Movement that I led. And it led to the Fair Employment Practices Commission created in California. And this was designed to push affirmative action. Well, the point is, what's called affirmative action came through street action, came through street power. So the context for the ending of affirmative action in universities and colleges, the context also is that whites are becoming a minority in this country. Black, brown, red, and yellow are becoming a majority. One of the things that the Supreme Court has attempted to do was to pit Asians against blacks. And so this is also being pictured as a decision in which Asians, in this case Chinese Americans, have sided with the forces that oppose affirmative action. The fact is, a majority of Asian Americans support affirmative action. The fact is that this suit that was brought to the Supreme Court, a white boy brought it, a conservative, and he went to Harvard and found him a few Asians that would sign on. But that's not the position necessarily of Asians. Now, I know some Asians probably feel that way, but the majority do not. In fact, it's a Black freedom movement that enabled this country to open up so that the immigration restrictions were lifted. We didn't demand it, but we created the climate for that to happen. And the fact is that the real issue for Blacks or people of color is the issue of white domination and white power. So if we look at how UC Berkeley has faced the issue of ending affirmative action, enrollment has gone way down for Black and brown people. And that's the name of the game. So the name of the game is to restrict the power of Black and brown people and red people or anybody else. And by the way, Asians are not just Chinese Americans. They're Southeast Asians, they're Filipinos, a host of others who aren't doing so well academically, who this also hurts. So the point is, if we're looking at the affirmative action decision, it is basically an expression of arbitrary power, the very power that is an expression of Aryan power. I pointed this out before in a previous show that when Chief Justice Oliver Holmes, one of the most influential justices on the Supreme Court, who had fought during the Civil War, was asked what determines the decisions of the Supreme Court, he said the most powerful forces in society. We're going back to Wisep Tepi for Africans, and in this case, the exercise of arbitrary power by Europeans. It's their history. But the key point is they're in decline now. Their power is going out. Note the exception in the Supreme Court ruling. It was that military academies would not be put in a position where they couldn't practice affirmative action. And why is that? Over 40% of the military is made up of Black and brown people. And they need officers who can command them, like the Colin Powells or the 3-star General Brother who runs the Air Force Academy, which is the West Point for the Air Force, a jet pilot, 3 stars. So it's all right to have affirmative action for Black people to die for a system that oppresses them, but don't have any for Blacks and brown and red people who might use that education in a different way, or even like Clarence Thomas, in a way that serves them. And it's a shame that a Clarence Thomas would feel so demeaned. And I'm going to do a show one of these days on him. Clarence Thomas feels ashamed of his Blackness because he said, how can you be proud if you're a people whose behind was kicked by whites? And he felt that in going to Yale, people were perceiving him as an affirmative action person. When he had good grades, he got into Yale. I've never said Clarence Thomas was dumb. I've never said that. I said he was unconscious. I said he didn't like himself. There was a sign at the Million Man March where I spoke, and there was a sign that said, Clarence Thomas should have never been born. And one of the biggest rises I got in my speeches when I referred to him. You know what I mean? So it's a shame that he, who had been in a BSU, had at one point had looked up to Malcolm X. It's a shame that he misinterpreted what happened in the 60s. He thought we were whipped in the 60s because we didn't defeat white supremacy, Well, it takes more than what we did then to do that. And as I said, that's a term you need to discard because a white boy ain't supreme anymore. That includes the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has eroded its own power. And in fact, one of the good things about a bad decision is that it's a part of a series of decisions that go against the popular will of this country. Now, a lot of whites are opposed to affirmative action. A lot of them believe that, not all, but a lot, the government has favored us over them. And some of them believe that their miserable condition right now is due to us. It's due to their corporations. They took the jobs out of the country. They've turned your cities into rust belts. They've got you on opiates, drugged out. They got your life expectancy gone down by 4 years. We didn't do that. We don't have the power or the will. Your own leaders did that, you know? But the point is, that's a perception among a sizable group of whites. But the fact of the matter is, a new day is coming. In less than 20 years, a majority in this country will be black, brown, red, and yellow, and the name of the game will be divide and conquer. And so the question is, how are we going to handle that? We need to take the best of our past to use it to restructure this society from unjust to just, to empower our people and all who are oppressed. So I want to conclude this, and I want to note this took an hour and 41 minutes. Note that, Ogawa, and the rest of you. So I want to say that we need to always draw from our roots, the deepest roots possible. And in a time in which things have fallen apart in Africa, Black communities have been heavily hit, and we've been put in a position of choosing between two cultures. We got to put things back together, draw from the best of our past, and come up with ways to take a society that's crooked and make it straight. Build power for our people. And I want to say finally that if your history means anything, then you have to be about making history. If you're not a part of some group that's doing something positive to change things for your people, get involved. Hotep. So let's see what we have here. Thank you, ancient African metaphysics. And that's really what our systems are based on, is metaphysics. Shonda Henderson, thank you too. Let's see, we got any comments here. M. Jewel, Aryan thought creates the problem, then pretends to solve it by keeping a job for themselves. Yeah. There's a comment I think was being held, and Egyptian metaphysics said African Americans have yet to become globally aware of African struggle. They did not participate or took interest in African struggle, not till South Africa Mandela. That's only partially true. That's largely not true, but there's truth to that. That Africans in America are not that knowledgeable about day-to-day events that are going on in Africa. And we have confusion around our identity with Africa. But when Africa stands up, we tend to be proud of that. Africans gave birth to the idea of Pan-Africanism, one Africa. Africans in the US and the Caribbean, especially Trinidad. So Africans have been engaged in Pan-Africanist struggles for a long time. The Pan-African Congresses held by Sylvester Williams in London in 1900, and then by Du Bois up until 1945. And then the Fifth Pan-African Congress, Africans in America played a prominent role in that. It was organized by George Padmore from Trinidad, and Kwame Nkrumah was trained to assist him. But W.B. Du Bois was put up as the honorary chair and chaired it out of recognition of his contribution. And when Nkrumah goes back to Africa, he has Africans participating in his government from the US, Africans from the Caribbean. And again, Padmore was his greatest advisor. You need to go and study that. Study the history of Pan-Africanism. The Garvey movement. That movement was basically backed by blacks in America. Garvey couldn't get his movement off in Jamaica. He got it off in the US, and then it became global. And that was a movement for straight up African unity and African independence. And it was the African in the South and the North, but especially the South that supported that movement, where to be black was a lynchable offense. Listen to what Queen Mother Moore would tell you. She was a member of the Garvey movement, one of our great Pan-Africanists, Shiros. And she talks about when Garvey came to New Orleans and the chief of police was not going to allow members or supporters of the Garvey movement. And Garvey had 75 chapters of his movement in Louisiana alone. These Africans came with guns, and the chief of police in New Orleans, had to open up the meeting and sat in the front row, scared to death. You hear me? Africans for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. That was Garvey's slogan. The African in America woke Garvey up, and then Garvey woke us up. That's a whole nother story. Look at my stuff I've done on this. Watch my shows. But the key is do your homework. Yeah, sister makes a comment. I believe this is the start of the unraveling of affirmative action policies many employers use. It will impact many jobs. Yes, but here's the key point about that. Most of the jobs that blacks have are not in private business. Most of us are not hired by big business. Most of us in local, state, and federal government. The key point is whatever jobs we have to fight for them. And one of the key fights we need to have now in black community is job campaigns, because the low-paying jobs that the blacks who have jobs have, and the no-paying, when you don't have a job, it's put us in the position we're in. And the urban movements and the San Francisco Freedom Movement that I led, that was the major thrust of that movement, was jobs. And that needs to be a major focus now, but unionized jobs. So that's a fight in the streets. And the way you win that is you put the businesses out of business that don't hire you, and use that to build more black businesses. It's not either or the other. Question by Brother Ugawa. What are your thoughts on Africa's destiny being bound to Africans in this country and elsewhere? Do you believe we hold the key to Africa's rise? Africans in each part of the world are going to have to wage struggles to free ourselves, and at the same time coordinate and support each other and give support to each other materially, politically, ideologically, on every level. We've done that in the past. Another example of the African American support is the African Liberation Support Committee that operated in the 70s. We here had that, but we had it around the country. My organization, Pan-African People's Organization, led that in the Bay Area. There was a sister named Belvie Brooks before us that headed that, and then after that, we chaired that. And we averaged 30,000 people a year and raised money for material support for the armed struggles in Africa, in Southern Africa. So those kinds of things need to go on, the interaction, the strategy, the changing. But each of us are going to have to free ourselves in the environments and the places in which we are. And I think that as this power weakens here, American power, it's going to open up more maneuvering room for Africans on the continent. But Africans on the continent got plenty of maneuvering room right now. Sandra, I'm on my show. Call me back in about an hour. So that's an ongoing thing. And a lot of us, like I did a show where I showed you in the 90s, I was in Nigeria and was a guest of the estate of Lagos. and negotiated cultural exchange programs. Some people, one person said, well, brainwash people, what good's that going to do? See, those are people who ain't doing nothing, because if you got that kind of concept, that's saying something about what you think about our people. I mean, cultural exchange, I mean, we shouldn't do that. You think that we're too brainwashed? No, the groups that are working together are groups that care about African people. All of our people aren't brainwashed, and those that are, we need to take them through an awakening process. So there's work on the ground that's occurring right now, and more that needs to happen to promote African unity. You know, M. Jewell is making the point that Thomas was opposed to affirmative action. Bush one picked the most brainwashed black person he could to put on the Supreme Court, and he is the oldest member of the Supreme Court. You could say it's his court right now. Loud as Zoo. Over to Shaka. Not sure if you have seen the movie Flatliner. However, how do we confirm the existence of spirits and the creator? And as I am sure you're aware, uh, the area number of non believers. Well, you want me to produce one right now? I would say that the logic of science proves it. The fact that everything that's material is sustained and held up and enlivened by spirit, or what they call energy. You know, so I think that given how a lot of people are prone to science, yeah, it's a spirit science. That really is what quantum physics is. So Bingham makes the point that I agree with, that quantum physics has reached a dead end, because quantum physics doesn't have a theory for wave and particle theory. You know, they can't explain what it is really, and that's spirit, baby. So, but I'd say there's a whole lot of other things. Listen to yourself. Um, Look at your own creativity. You made the point, Lao Tzu, last week that um, thinking involves fixing things. Yeah, but it also involves creating things. And we know this. This is affirmed again by science. All the breakthroughs in science come from the spirit realm. That's what scientists say. That's what Einstein said. Came from a dream. Look at every breakthrough, you know. Wolf Banu, I think Kemet fell because the Kemetu aided the Amor devs by teaching them and taking them in. First of all, nations rise and fall, just like people live and die. You had a 10,000 year civilization. It fell. There are a lot of reasons why it fell, but we treat it all like it's tragedy. 10,000 years of the highest peak of classical civilization in the world? Huh? It's not a tragedy. So there are a lot of reasons why it went into decline. You know what I mean? And that's also cycles, historical cycles. Just so you have the rise and fall, you have the creative cycles, you have the non creative. And I should point out the 18th dynasty that a lot of Africans take pride in, which was the imperial dynasty that Cheikh Diop correctly defined as defensive imperialism. That is, the Kemites struck out at places that had attacked them, uh, in this case, Palestine. Um, and so they carried out invasions, but they didn't occupy those countries. It was defensive. They were trying to hold off future invasions. But it was also a period where greater secularization and materialism emerged, and corruption. And this is part of what the Pharaoh Akhenaten was trying to address, even though he went too far in certain ways. That is, not concentrating on his defenses. So there's a lot of reasons, M. Jewel, yeah, I'm glad you got something out of that. Art of Ancient Egyptian Metaphysics. Yes, I've read all the Swallowed Loop's works. Germina's star. They also see native people of the land they conquer as part of the trees and plants. Yeah, to be cut down. Yeah, true. Sandra Henderson, it's important to understand power and material aligns with a war people. Yeah. Wolf Manlu talking about metaphysics. Wolf Manlu, when our people get retaught that we are God having a human experience, we serve our ancestors' collective will. True. That's also what the concept of destiny means. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Wolf Manlu, the Ka, the individuality of you that is eternal. This is what came into the union of sperm and egg. Yeah, good point. Yeah, the point about pedagogy is we're using a European pedagogy right now, so we got to have our own, not just to have the information that's right, the method for teaching it. I'm very glad to see someone else say that our philosophy and theirs are different. Too much confusion has been pushed by many of our respected scholars saying that these Greek traditions are direct copies of our stuff. Yeah, correct. Yeah, Wolf Manlu is right. I like to have some questions here, so Okay, that looks like it's it. Um, so I've enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. And remember, next week we'll have Ana Maria Cabral on. When you saw me on the phone, it's a sister who had set this up. I'll be talking to her shortly. I think today they're having special honors for her on the East Coast. So, Hotep, until next week.